All right, welcome back to Wisdom Teachings. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and in this episode, we are going to begin a comprehensive investigation into the hard, absolute scientific facts of interplanetary climate change. When I discussed this before, I only did it in episodes 9 and 10 of Wisdom Teachings, and I only glossed on a few little things. What I'm going to do now, beginning in this episode, is to really show you how far-reaching and comprehensive this evidence is. Remember, when we're dealing in an arena of science, you're not talking about things that can be argued. You're talking about facts. You're talking about measurable, empirical data. And some of the research that we're going to get into is how certain NASA scientists were ordered to suppress information that would suggest that interplanetary climate change is real. When I was reading The Law of One beginning in January 1996, and they were talking about an ascension, a planetary dimensional shift, even all the way back then, it occurred to me, in order for something that magnificent and monumental to happen, not just to the Earth, but to our solar system, there would have to be some measurable energetic increase to activate our DNA, to activate the planet, to activate a new level of time and space itself, especially because the Law of One referred to it as a quantum leap. So that was the mystery, and I was expecting that I was going to find something suggesting a massive energetic shift. And I knew the Law of One had already talked about the idea that the Earth changes, the Earth heating up was the result of this energetic shift taking place. So even way back when I first started reading this, I saw data to support the idea of an interplanetary climate change model, which, as I've said here, is NASA's hottest secret. It all goes back to this idea that there is an etheric energy zone expanding into our solar system. We've touched on this extensively with scientific data. And if so, what is it going to do? And when is it going to do it? And how do we prepare for it? It was in December 2009 that NASA admitted that we're heading into a highly magnetic cloud. As I showed you, here it is on their website. Our solar system is passing through an interstellar cloud that physics says should not exist. There's the link. Here's another picture where you see more of the body of the article, and the top story's on the right. And Merav Ofer says that from Voyager data, they've discovered a strong magnetic field that is just outside the solar system. Now, they discovered this, so they're not saying whether it existed before or not, and that's an important point. It could very well be that this validates Russian data that we should have plenty of time to get into in this episode, where the Russians have said that this energy, from their calculations, has very substantially increased. So if NASA is only announcing that they discovered it now, then we have no way of knowing if it changed from what it was before, whereas the Russians have apparently been observing it since the 1960s, and they say that it has very significantly increased in its overall energetic charge, which is what would happen if we're pushing into a cloud. And when you see Dr. Merav Ofer's picture right here, she posed in front of an image of the heliosphere, which is the sun's magnetic field, crashing into this highly yellow-orange energetic-looking cloud at this area that they're calling the bow shock. And we're going to see that diagram in a lot more detail. And here is a copy of her paper from December 24th, 2009 in Nature Science Journal, which is the sun's magnetic field crashing into this highly yellow-orange energetic-looking cloud at this area that they're calling the bow shock. And we're going to see that diagram in a lot more detail. And here is a copy of her paper from December 24th, 2009 in Nature Science Journal, a strong, highly tilted interstellar magnetic field near the solar system. They did not expect this to be there. And if you go over to MIT, which is one of the universities that she works with, it actually has a copy of her paper for free to download, whereas from Nature you have to pay for it. And so this is the actual scan of their publication in the Nature Journal of this paper. And you can see Merav Ofer is the first name listed on that paper. And then you see in the graph there on the right, they have the years, but notice that it only goes from the end of 2007 up to the end or middle of 2009, not even the end of 2009. So they've only got about a 2-year graph there. But what happens is that they're using data from Voyager to discover this very highly magnetic field that broke all the molds. They didn't expect anything this powerful was going to be out there. So now I'm going to be reading to you from this article that we were quoting from already from NASA on NASA's website, where they make this announcement not in scientific terms like in a science journal, but in more of a layperson's terms. Let's take a look. The solar system is passing through an interstellar cloud that physics says should not exist. Using data from Voyager, we have discovered a strong magnetic field just outside the solar system, according to Merav Ofer. Astronomers call the cloud we're running into now the local interstellar cloud, or local fluff for short. It's a pretty uninspiring name, considering how awesome this thing is if it's going to create ascension. It's about 30 light years wide, that's actually huge, and it contains a wispy mixed 100 degrees Celsius boils water. 6,000 degrees Celsius? Wow. So this is a very energetic 30 light years across. That's enormous, because light travels a long way in 1 year. If it takes 186,000 miles just to do 1 second, right? 30 light years across? This is a gigantic, highly energetic, very hot cloud. 6,000 degrees Celsius. It's almost mind-boggling. But yet there it is, and we're crashing right into this, which, remember, Corey from the space program, we've also had Henry Deacon, and my insider Bruce has said this, and actually my insider Daniel from the Montauk Project. They've all said that the secret space program has sent ships out into this cloud. They've tested it, and they know that we're going to go in and collide with this thing. ETs know about this. They put it into our prophecies. It comes in a very predictable interval, and once we hit it, the sun makes a big flash. But before the sun gives off its flash, it's got to have all this charge that builds up. The solar system gets all charged up before it releases that energy like a big cosmic arc out, like an electrical arc. If you arc out on something, the energy goes and you get this big lightning bolt. It's like the sun is going to arc out. But in order to get there, it's got to have all this charge up, and that's interplanetary climate change, which we're going to start getting into later in this episode. Now let's keep reading from this NASA press release. The mystery of this fluff has to do with its surroundings. This is their theory. I don't think this is what it is. I just want to be clear on that. This is their theory. About 10 million years ago, a cluster of supernovas exploded nearby, and they're saying that's what causes the bubble. Of course, what we're saying causes the bubble is a domain wall that is emanating from the center of the galaxy itself, a la William Toe. A cluster of supernovas exploded nearby, and they're saying that's what causes the bubble. Of course, what we're saying causes the bubble is a domain wall that is emanating from the center of the galaxy itself, a la William Tift, who discovered these redshift boundaries where they're quantized, as I've said in previous episodes. Let's keep reading. So the point is that the fluff is completely surrounded by this high-pressure supernova exhaust, and it should be crushed or dispersed by it. So they don't understand why this cloud is so stable, why it's so strong. They think that it should just get squashed, but it isn't. Let's keep going. The observed temperature and density of the local cloud do not provide enough pressure to resist the crushing action of the hot gas around it, according to Ofer. So how does this fluff, this cloud, survive? The Voyagers have found an answer, sort of. Voyager data show that the fluff is vastly more strongly magnetic than anyone previously suspected, between 4 and 5 microgauss. And to have that much magnetic charge just hanging around in the vastness of space is very unusual. All these scientists, when you read this press release, they did not expect this much magnetic energy. But it totally fits with the domain wall, because let's remember that when we were looking at Roshin and Godin's replication of the Searle effect, and remember they turned it on and then you can put your hand in there and there's these walls where things get cold and it even moves through the ceiling. What else did they find in there? Magnetic energy, magnetic charge that you can measure with a magnetometer. We're seeing the exact same thing here, an unusually high magnetic charge. What happens when our solar system collides with a very high magnetic charge and a high temperature? We're going to get magnetized. We're going to get energized. That's where all this is going. Now let's keep reading. Yeah, okay, the magnetic fields are there, and no disrespect to Dr. Ofer. I'm just saying that if you look at Tift, who's an accredited scientist, and you look at Afton and all these other guys, now we have a better explanation for why this thing doesn't get crushed. It is part of a big, gigantic force field that is just blasting its way through the galaxy as it moves. Now here is an image of the fluff, and again, it's very clear when you read the article, this is totally an artist's conception, meaning that it really has no bearing on any physical reality at all. It's just a sketch based on an imaginative idea of what it may look like, and that's important. If we really understand what this thing is, I believe it's going to be much more of a wall with a very clear structure, not this kind of wispy thing. But this is what they're showing you as they're seeing that, yes, our sun is colliding with something. You notice the arrow says the direction of the sun's movement, and that's moving to the left. And then you notice there's an arrow pointing down, and it says that's the motion of the local interstellar cloud. So we're kind of hitting it on an angle, just like when we were talking about Dr. Harold Aston's model of colliding with cubes in space, that you might not hit the cube dead on, you might hit it at an angle. This is the same thing here. And it may very well be a cubical boundary as well. Now let's keep reading. NASA's 2 Voyager probes have been racing out of the solar system for more than 30 years. They are now beyond the orbit of Pluto and on the verge of entering interstellar space, but they are not there yet. The Voyagers are not actually inside the local fluff, according to Ofer, but they are getting close, and they can sense what the cloud is like as they approach it with actual measurements. The fluff is held at bay just beyond the edge of the solar system by the sun's magnetic field, which is inflated by the solar wind into a magnetic bubble. Held at bay just beyond the edge of the solar system by the sun's magnetic field, which is inflated by the solar wind into a magnetic bubble more than 10 billion kilometers wide. This is called the heliosphere, and it acts as a shield to help protect the inner solar system from galactic cosmic rays and interstellar clouds. And here again is the image, the same image that Ofer had on her computer in the background, only at a much higher and more beautiful resolution. So heliosphere would be this teardrop-shaped envelope of magnetic energy, and the really key area here is the bow shock, which of course, if you think about what happens as you have a rocket that's coming back into Earth's atmosphere, right? You can't just land your rocket. If you come in too fast, you get friction, and as you rub against the air on the way in, it starts to become glowing because it's so hot. So heat is the result of blasting into something that's more dense. So as we're crashing into this cloud, it's heating up, and they're measuring it in terms of this 6,000 degrees Celsius temperature and this high magnetic charge. They didn't announce this until 2009. The Russians were onto this way before then, and they say that that magnetic charge at the front end has very significantly increased. Now let's keep reading. The 2 Voyagers are located in the outermost layer of the heliosphere or heliosheath, where the solar wind is slowed down by interstellar gas. Voyager 1 entered it in 2004, and Voyager 2 followed in August 2007. These crossings were key to Ofer et al.'s discovery. So here again you're seeing that the Voyagers are coming right up against the sheath. They're right at the edge, and now they can finally use these instruments on those probes to measure this cloud, because they don't have any other tools available to them in NASA except for all the classified. Here's a closer view where you see the Voyager right up against the termination shock. This is another NASA diagram. Here's another one where you see the termination shock, the bow shock, etc. And you see how small the solar system is compared to the size of this. Even the orbit of Pluto, which is slightly tilted in the ecliptic plane, it's just a small, tiny thing inside these much larger structures around our sun. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The size of the heliosphere is determined by a balance of forces. Solar wind inflates the bubble from the inside, while the local fluff compresses it from the outside. Voyager's crossings into the heliosheath revealed the approximate size of the heliosphere and thus how much pressure the local fluff is exerting upon it. A portion of that pressure is now determined to be magnetic, and corresponds to the approximately 5 microgauss that Ofer's team has reported in Nature. And again, that 5 microgauss is way, way more than what they thought they were going to get. It blew their theoretical models out the window. They did not expect that much magnetic energy. They did not expect that much temperature. It totally caught them by surprise. And it's only because of these Voyagers, as you see again, here's another image of the same thing, crashing into the edge, right at the edge, that they were actually able to make this discovery. And again, the key here is that it's very strongly magnetic, much more than anyone had previously suspected. That is the most important thing to get out of this. And it can provide extra pressure to resist the destruction. Here's where we get into some very important stuff. I did not start reading about interplanetary climate change and actually getting the scientific evidence you're about to see until 5 years after I began reading the Law of One. Because I began reading the Law of One in January 96, and I didn't learn about this until December 2000. So that was a long time for me to be met a burst of energy charging up our solar system. If the ancient Egyptian prophecy is communicated to us through Plato, that the sun is going to do some big flash, if that was true, then we darn well ought to be seeing the solar system charging up and getting ready for the big energetic release. Not just on Earth, but the whole solar system. Now, the guy who introduced me to this is Dr. Mark Cummings, and it was a very interesting synchronicity that when you watch the Cosmic Disclosure episodes, which may or may not have aired by now, with Mark McCandlish, that Mark McCandlish, who was interviewed by Gaia staff, I wasn't there when it happened, independently brought up Dr. Mark Cummings as having developed a very strange phenomenon with a crystal, where he had a synthesized crystal and he wraps it around with coil, energizes the coil, and eventually the crystal started glowing and creating free energy. And the next morning, men came in with all of the earpieces on and the black ops type of stuff they're wearing and weapons. They confiscated the crystal and they threatened him. And I had had extensive discussions with him. Mark Cummings was our original science advisor for the first seminar tour that I ever did called The Time of Global Shift. So if you want to look him up, you got to make sure you spell his last name right. It's C-O-M-I-N-G-S. This is how he looked at the time that I knew him. He then cut his hair and got a shorter hairdo. And this was our original seminar tour. At the time that he gave me this information, he was not appearing on stage. That didn't happen until 2002. Back then, he was just slipping me some information, didn't want to be public. And now he's since gone into hiding. But what he did is he pointed me towards the work of this amazing man who actually, by my writing about him and how it went viral on the internet and got millions of views, I basically made this guy, this doctor, into a national hero of Russia. And he went from obscurity to being extremely popular. His name is Dr. Oleksiy Dmitriev. This is kind of a dim image of him. And when I went through the internet, I was able to find a much higher resolution photo of him. This is definitely the right guy. This is Dmitriev. And he wrote this paper that absolutely rocked my world. Mark Cummings sent me the link to this in December 2000. It was called Planetophysical State of the Earth and Life. Doesn't sound interesting at all. It's not a captivating title. It doesn't say we're about to ascend or ascension is imminent or kind of alarmist things that I might write on my website. This is just a pretty dry, boring kind of thing, but yet, wow, when you read this, holy smokes, is it amazing. I just couldn't even believe it. I read this on the plane. Mark gave me the link. I downloaded it on my computer. I had it waiting in my browser, and I loaded all the pages in advance because I knew it was going to be good. And I'm on a flight, and I'm reading this, and I was so excited, I wanted to run around up and down the aisle. Even though we were still climbing in altitude, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was so amazed. So, it was written in January 1997, which means that it's now literally 20 years old. It's hard to believe. And it was on this website called the Millennium Group, which is now tmgnow.com, and this is the link where you can find it. And then they give you his credentials, that he's a professor of geology and mineralogy and the chief scientific member of the United Institute of Geology, Geophysics, and Mineralogy in the Siberian department of the Russian Academy of Sciences. That means he's way out there in the cold. So that's some hard living, but you know, there's guys out there doing some amazing work, because you sure can't go outside and have, so that's some hard living, but you know, there's guys out there doing some amazing work, because you sure can't go outside and have fun. You're going to be indoors. If you're a scientist, that's perfect, because you spend all day working. So it also says here that he is an expert on global ecology and fast processing Earth events, and it was translated by Dmitriev, Tetanov, and Earl Crockett, who runs Millennium Group. And they didn't publish it until January 8th, 1998. So they didn't publish it until January 8th, 1998. So it actually was online ever since then. Therefore, it had been all of 98, all of 99, and most of 2000, so basically 3 years before Mark Cummings had found it. And then I was already doing these time of global shift events, or we were getting ready to do them. I think at that point we hadn't done it yet. And he said, oh my God, David, if you're going to talk about ascension and you're going to talk about some kind of dimensional shift, you need to read this right now. Drop everything, run and read this paper. Okay, absolutely. I mean, I get tingles thinking about it because I got so excited. Now let's check out what it says. This is the very introductory part of the paper, and I'm going to, in case some of the wording's a little awkward, I'm going to make it easier for you. Current planetophysical alterations. Planetophysical is apparently a word. It's a translation of a word they use in Russian. Current planetophysical alterations of the Earth are becoming irreversible, meaning the Earth changes are irreversible. There is strong evidence that these transformations of the Earth and our solar system are being caused by highly charged material and energetic non-uniformities in anisotropic interstellar space. Now that's a fancy way of saying an energy cloud. Energetic stuff that we're crashing into. And then as it keeps on going, these energetic clouds have broken into the interplay of our solar system, and that's what's causing the Earth changes. And he doesn't give us a free pass and say, don't worry about fossil fuels and industrial emissions and all this. We're making it worse by our technology, but we're also dealing with some kind of very interesting cosmic effect. Now let's keep reading. This donation of energy is producing hybrid processes and excited energy states in all the planets, as well as the sun. Up until this point, when I read these words, no one had ever made this claim before. I was very excited at this point. Let's continue. Effects here on Earth are to be found in the acceleration of magnetic pole shift, in the changes of vertical and horizontal ozone distribution, and in the increased frequency and magnitude of huge catastrophic events in our climate. So all these things that are so upsetting, these weird shifts in the weather, there's more earthquakes, there's more volcanoes, we're going to get into all of that. He's saying it has an interplanetary, interstellar cause, that we're crashing into this new energy. And he proves it in this paper. We're going to go through a lot of that right now. There is growing probability that we are moving into a rapid temperature instability period similar to the one that took place 10,000 years ago. And that's a geological fact. This is where sea levels suddenly rose. And it was one of the things that you hear guys like Graham Hancock talk about this a lot. Appears to be the second of two as we move into this so-called Younger Dryas period, the first of which appears to be more of an energetic release, the second of which happens about 2,000, 2,500 years later and does even more damage. But it takes place, these changes that he's talking about 10,000 years ago, they happened very rapidly. And the reason why he brings this up, that these kinds of rapid changes could happen again, and it's much more rapid and much more intense than anything that we've seen up until now. That's also a very important point. Now let's continue. The adaptive responses of the biosphere and humanity to these new conditions may lead to a total global revision of the range of species and life on Earth. Well, if you kind of think about what he's saying, a total revision of life on Earth and the species therein, that's ascension. He doesn't ever say ascension. He doesn't ever say spiritual change. Actually, he does at the end. In the next episode, we'll probably have enough time to get to that. But he's describing life on Earth being transformed by whatever we're going through. So by this point, I'm getting really excited. He's saying all of these things that I was expecting if a scientist could make these breakthroughs, he would reach these conclusions. And here it is right in front of me. I was stunned. Let's go on. Current in-process geological, geophysical, and climatic alterations of the Earth are becoming more and more irreversible. At the present time, researchers are revealing some of the causes which are leading to a general reorganization of the electromagnetic skeleton of our planet and its climatic machinery. So now he's got the cause of why the planet is doing all these strange, unpredictable things. And it's an interplanetary effect caused by us moving into this cloud. Let's continue. Indeed, events of the last decade give strong evidence of unusually significant heliospheric and planetophysical transformations. Now remember, this was written in 1997. He's saying the last decade. That goes back to 87. And we know what the heliosphere is now. That's the sun's magnetic field. Now he's saying that since 1987, Russian scientists have been noticing very significant changes in the heliosphere. And he gets a lot more specific. Let's continue. Given the quality, quantity, and scale of these transformations, we may say that the climatic and biosphere processes here on Earth, through a tightly connected feedback system, are directly impacted by and linked back to the general overall transformational processes taking place in our solar system. He's not cutting any corners. This is a professional from the Russian Academy of Sciences, highly accredited scientist, saying, you want to understand what's happening on Earth? Guess what? It's a solar system-wide effect. This guy is highly accredited, highly credentialed. There is no reason to dispute him because he has so much data. And now we're going to get into that data. Let's take a look. He talks about changes in the heliosphere, and he says, we must begin to organize our attention and thinking to understand that climatic changes on Earth are only one part or link in a whole chain of events taking place in our heliosphere. Wow! Considering the problems of adaptation that our Earth's biosphere will have with these new physical conditions, we need to distinguish the general tendency and the nature of what the heck is going on. As we will show below, these tendencies may be traced in the direction of planet energy capacity growth, or capacitance. The planet's energy is rising. And this is leading to a highly excited or charged state in some, actually many, of Earth's systems. And then he says the most intense transformations are taking place in the planetary gas plasma envelopes, meaning the atmospheres, to which the productive possibilities of our biosphere are tied. Currently, this new scenario of excess energy runoff is being formed and observed in the ionosphere by plasma generation. So he's saying there's plasma showing up in the Earth's charged particle atmosphere. In the magnetosphere by magnetic storms. So there again, increase in magnetic energy. In the atmosphere by cyclones, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. The high energy atmospheric phenomena, which was rare in the past, is now becoming more frequent, intense, and changed in its nature. The material composition of the Earth's gas plasma envelope is also being transformed. It is quite natural for the whole biosphere of the Earth to be subjected to these changing conditions of the electromagnetic field and to the significant, deep alterations of Earth's climatic machinery. And lastly, he says, these fundamental processes of change create a demand within everything alive on Earth to adapt. All the organisms have to adapt with this change, and these natural developments may lead to a total global revision of the range of species and life on Earth. He is laying it down for you. And in the next episode, we are going to get into the stunning examples of Dr. Lesky Dmitriev's research, where he just starts ticking off data point after data point after data point of all these weird things that are happening in and around the Earth. He's going to tell you how energy that comes out of the sun is now traveling faster through space, how the planets are heating up, how the actual boundary at the front of the heliosphere is charging up a lot more. So whatever Dr. Merov-Ofer was seeing in 2009, it was already a lot more than what the Russians were measuring back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. All that and much more about to scientifically proving the ascension and the validity of so many ancient prophecies. Everybody needs to know this. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.